19b. First, literally the first word on the line. Okay, let's just go back and review a little bit. Okay, question was as follows. Is tzroros chayiv in Rosh Hashanah in a public domain? Tzroros again is the pebbles. If the animal kicks the pebbles, is a chayiv in a public domain or not? That was the Gemara's question. The Gemara resolves that it's a total de regel, and therefore you're exempt. Tzroros is regel, and therefore you're exempt in a public domain. And the Gemara wants to know what happens if he kicks in a public domain, but it lands in a private domain. It's chayav or not. So originally he said that you're not chayav. Why? Because the action took place in a domain where you'd be exempt for damages. And then the Gemara says that he changed his mind and he said you are chayav. Okay, and that's where we are. The Gemara asks, "Any Top first word, 19b top word, first word on the line." V'ha'omer Rabbi Yehudah. Rabbi Yehudah said, "Ein chatzin ezek cholak lo lo shesayachid v'lo lo shesarabim." There is no difference in when you make a half payment. There's no difference between a public domain or a private domain. My love, what does he mean? He means that if the animal is paying half payment to tzroros because it kicked and damaged in a public domain, then you'd be chayav. And therefore, what do we see? We see that tzroros is chayav in Rosh Hashanah. Gemara says, "Loi, not necessarily. It kicked in the pebble in Rosh Hashanah, but it damaged in a private domain. The pebble was kicked in a public domain, but damaged in a private domain." Gemara says, "Va'amar takira ein kan hanacha yeshkan." Didn't you say that because the domain where it kicked, you were exempt, therefore there's no payment required? Amar Leis, he said to him, Hajibi, I changed your mind. Ibai is another possibility. Rabbi Yehudah was referring to all chatzinezek. He wasn't referring to regal at all. A Karen. He was referring to Karen and not regal. So therefore it's not difficult either. There's nothing to do with tzroros. Yosef Rabbi Yehudah Nasiya Rabbi Aishia killed Rabbi Yehudah. Rabbi Yehudah, the Nasi, and Rabbi Aishia were standing on the porch that was the overhang that was in front of Rabbi Yehudah's house. One of them asked the following question: Kiskasav is nova mahu. It sort of wagged its tail and it broke things. So the other one said to him, is he supposed to tie its tail while he walks? Obviously not. In other words, this is normal behavior, and you're exempt in the public domain. So Gemara says, if that's an argument, you should say you have to tie the animal's horns when you take them out. So Gemara says, there's no comparison. Karen lav orche. There's nothing unusual about there is something unusual about an animal goring with its horn. However, with an animal sort of wagging its tail, it seems to be part of normal behavior. So the Gemara says, okay, if it's normal, what was the question? Obviously, it's regal, and if regal and shusarabim is potter. So the Gemara says, it was doing extra wagging. And that question is if that is considered regular or Karen. Okay, boy Ravina had a question. It was sort of wagging its male reproductive organ and it broke things. Karen lav yitzur. Do we say this is like Karen? Because Karen requires an arousal, so to speak. It's not a sexual arousal, but it's sort of an arousal to anger. Karen is an angry animal. So therefore, it's in the category of Karen. They both require the common denominator between Karen and it are being aroused. Or do we say no? Karen, it has intention to do damage. Over here, the animal might be in heat, but it doesn't intend on doing damage. The Gemara says, let it stand. Okay. Okay, so the Gemara talks about you had a chicken, and tied to the chicken's legs was a widget.
What's it?
A widget.
Okay.
Whatever, something was attached to a dlil. What's a dlil? It's a piece of. I'm not exactly sure what dlil is. Let's see what a dlil is. Yeah, 1 second. Yeah, Rashi says anything that's tied to its leg is called a dlil. So it's a widget. Yeah, whatever it is, something is tied. Something is tied to its leg, whatever it is. Now, obviously, the question here is, how did something get tied to its leg? And what category of nezek is that? You can imagine there's two types of potential damages here. There's you can say this is mammon hamazik, it's an ear animal, or you could say this is a burr. It's a pit.
Oh yeah.
You're bringing a widget that people could trip over into the public domain. So Amar Rafuna says, Lo yishanu al sheniksha me'elav. This is only true if it was tied on its own. Avakoshrei adam chayav. However, if a person tied it, then the individual that tied it is chayav. In other words, somehow this widget got tied onto the animal's foot, then the owner of the animal is chayav because of mammon hamazik, meaning his own animal. However, if somebody tied a widget to the animal's foot, so then the guy who tied it is responsible. So the Gemara says, "Niksha me'elav man chayav." Let's say it got tied on its own. Who's chayav? Ilam bal hadlil, the owner of the widget. Hechidami. What's the scenario? Ida atzna, if he protected his widget, in other words, his widget wasn't freely available, in the chicken library to be borrowed. So then on
his wayward widget.
What was that?
He didn't watch his wayward widget. Say
Yeah.
it real fast 3 times.
Ida atzna, if he protected it, honestly, then obviously he's not chayiv because he did what he had to do. V'lo atzna, if he did not watch his widget, in other words, he put his widget was easily available to a chicken which took it. Then peshehu, he's a pesheah, and he potentially put his stuff in a place where an animal could turn it into a bar. So he should be chayiv. So what it says, El chayiv bal tarnagol. If it got tied on its own, the owner of the chicken's chayiv. So the Gemara says, 1 second. Ma'ishna kulan as it delay. Yiftach ishbar v'lay sharbar.
They're tied on its own. The owner is liable.
The owner of the chicken is liable because he should have watched his chicken.
Oh.
Not the owner. The owner of the widget watched his widget. He didn't. It wasn't his fault. Okay. Now, a very interesting point here, which is that in talking about creating a bar, the creation of the bar has to be done by a person. If let's say your shar walks down the street, okay, it's not quite to happen with a shar, but let's say you happen to have a pet squirrel, which I don't recommend. Okay.
So what's it?
A pet squirrel.
Yeah.
Yeah, or a pet beaver or a pet raccoon. I don't know if raccoons borrow. I don't think raccoons borrow, so forget about the raccoon. The squirrel. He digs a hole, he digs a pothole.
Right.
And he goes on this dirt road, a lot of those in Portland, and he digs a pothole.
Big is this pothole that this
Big enough that the next guy's car with his 4 tires had a flat.
Right.
Are you chayiv for what your pet squirrel did?
Yeah.
No, you're not chayiv. Why? Because to make a bar, you're chayiv for bar. And to make a bar, you have to make the bar, not your squirrel.
Oh, but it's your squirrel.
You're supposed to watch it, but your squirrel there didn't do damage. Your squirrel dug a bar, and therefore you're exempt. Only you, the person has to dig the bar. You have to dig the bar. Now, there is a slight difference here. Let's say, for example, you, take an oil pan and put it on the street, and your rabbit moves it a couple of feet. Then you would be chayav, because your oil pan in a public domain is clearly a hazard. Now your animal didn't make it; it moved it. That's a different story. But for an animal cannot make a bar.
This all sounds kind of squirrely to me, Rabbi.
Okay. A man has to open a pit, not an animal. So what happened? In other words, your what do you call it? Your chicken took the widget and dropped it off in the middle of the street, or it was standing there in the middle of the street, and somebody trips over the widget, right? Or the widget's very thorny and it pops a tire or something like that. Well, in that case, the widget is a bar. And why are you chayav for your animal creating the bar? Your animal was dancing around in the garbage until eventually something got tied onto its foot, which it schlepped into the public domain and somebody tripped over it. Right? Why are you chayav for that? If it's a shor bar, it's your animal created the hazard. Elamasnis in the Mishnah is referring to the adya aduye. 1 second. Yeah. Where the animal sort of threw this widget at something and it broke. And Rav Huna's statement was referring to something else. Okay, if the animal threw it directly, that's a classical instance of tzaros, and therefore chayav chatzin nezek. Now, when Rav Huna made this differentiation between who exactly tied the widget, Rav Huna was referring to something else. Okay, it's Rav Huna ba'alma itmar. Little hefker. If the widget was ownerless, Rav Huna nikshar me'elav potter kasher adam chayav. You had an ownerless lil. So Rav Huna says as follows: if it got tied on its own, in other words, the chicken took some garbage from the garbage pile and dumped it in the street, and it caused damage. Then the owner of the chicken is exempt from damages. That's called a shor bar. In other words, if your animal makes a hazard in the street, and somebody falls in that hazard, then you're exempt. So, for example, if your animal, I don't know, your dog schleps a bunch of bones into the street, which later pops somebody's tire.
But you're not responsible?
You're not responsible for that, because your animal put the hazard there, not you.
Okay.
You have to, in order to be chayav and bar, you have to dig it. However, says Rav Huna, nikshar kosher adam chayav. If, for example, you took the bones and you threw it into the street, and your dog chased after it, and then somebody's tire got broken, even if the dog moved it around, you're still chayav. The guy who gave the dog the bone is chayav.
It's hard to distinguish.
Kosher adam chayav, mishum mai chayav. Why is he chayav? Amar Rav Huna bar menoyach mishum borim eskalgal bragli adam bragli behema. If a guy takes a dangerous item, puts it in the street, a bunch of rocks or something, and the animals move around the rocks before they do damage, he's still chayav because of bar. He created a movable bar. Not every bar is going to be a pit. Some bars are stumbling blocks. He put the stumbling block in the public domain, and it happens to be that it was moved around because obviously a stumbling block might be moved around, and therefore he's chayav. The guy who put it there is chayav. Okay, Ketzad Hashem. What is Shein? Hashem muedis lechos roilo. The tooth is muad to eat that which is appropriate to it. Normal food. We'll see. In animals is muad to eat fruits and vegetables. If it eats garments, towels, kalim or vessels, because that's mishun, that's abnormal. That's Karen. When is it Shruber Shusanizik? Alba Shusarab Potter. In a public domain, you're exempt. The imnenis meshalamis mashanenis. Very important. Even though Shane is exempt in the public domain, let's say, for example, somebody was in the public domain and their animal starts eating off another animal's back. It eats everything up. Or the animal eats somebody else's stuff in a public domain. So he's exempt from damages. However, the owner of the ox derives a benefit here. His animal is going to be less hungry. Right? Makes sense? Ultimately speaking, he benefited some amount of feedstock that he won't have to give his animal. Now, that's not necessarily the case. What happens if he pays nothing for feedstock?
The animal might also just get sick and puke it up or die.
Yeah, but if it dies, maybe. But if it doesn't die, then he did save something. Well, if it pukes, maybe. But again, let's say it didn't. Now it could be the guy sends his animals to pasture in the national forest, which is fine, and then the guy doesn't have any benefits because he wasn't paying for food. But if this is a guy who normally has to feed his animal, so he does benefit from it. So therefore, even though he doesn't pay the damages, Mishalamis Mashanenis, he pays the value of the benefit. Kate said, how exactly does that work? Kate said, Mishalamis Mashanenis, how does that work? Mishalamis Mashanenis. It eats in the street. If it eats from the street, it pays the value of the benefit. However, let's say it eats from the sides of the street. These are places where merchants can bring their wares, so they're entitled to be there, and therefore the animal is chayev. You pay the damage of how much it ate, what the value of what it ate was. Let's say you have a storefront and it eats out from the owner of the storefront. It eats the display case. Then Mishalamis Mashanenes, you pay the value of the benefit. In other words, how much feedstock are you saving yourself? However, if it goes into the door, the bull inside the china shop, then you got to pay. This is not Karen. This is Shane. It's inside the hay shop. Mishalamis Mashazika, you pay the value of the hay that it damaged.
Well, what if it's an animal that right now we're at least. I don't know how far behind in convention I am, but I think we're talking about an animal that it is not normal for it to eat things that are not part of its regular fare. What we're talking about a goat. I mean, what's really enough if it's a goat, because goats will eat.
Yes,
Or near anything.
we'll see. Okay. The answer is that not only that, we'll see. We'll get to talk about goats in a moment.
All right.
Okay, we'll get to it. But the answer is the answer in a nutshell for now is that yes, you would be chayev if a goat ate a towel, presuming that's the normal thing to do.
Back to just
Sure.
If your pet squirrel grabbed something from the side like a nut and put it out in the middle of the street, that's not you're not.
You would not be.
But
chayev.
if you put it in the middle of the street
and it moves it, then you would be chayev. Exactly.
Oh my.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught Hashem wedis lechals haroylo. Ketzad. Shane eats what's appropriate for it. It eats things that are normal to eat. Right? It had fine wine. No, I'm kidding. it drank whatever, water from the trough, whatever it was.
Like champagne.
Yeah, Mishal as Ishal, it pays full damages. Similarly, I had a pet wild animal. I don't know, a pet lion, something like that, a predatory animal, and it went into your property. Vitarfa, it took your sheep and it killed it. Vitarfa behem va'achlan, and it ate the sheep. Mishalom as Ishalom, v'achabasim mishalom as Ishalom, you pay full damages. That's regular shame. Nothing unusual about that. Uparish achlas sa'arim. Okay, so now we give a few examples of borderline foods that animals will eat, but only if they're very hungry. And again, I'm no expert here. Parish achlas sa'arim, an ox that eats barley. The chamor she'achla karshinin is cress, I believe, eaten by a donkey. The kelev she'likik es hashemen, or a dog that is licking the oil. The chazir she'achla chaticha shabasar, or a pig that eats a piece of meat. Mishalom azik shalom. All these pay full damages. Amar Papa, Sir Papa interprets this price. Sahash the Amar. Now that we're saying that things that are not normal to eat, but the animal could eat it and sometimes does. It's called eating, and therefore you're chayev as a shalom. It's shame, even if it's not the regular food. If it's an acceptable food or something the animal would eat,
something that's edible.
Yeah, that's called an eating, and therefore you're chayev. So hi shunur the achal tamri, the chamer the achal binasa. You have a shunur, I believe, is a cat. The achal tamri was eating dates, or the chamer, a donkey. The achal binisa is a fish. Thank you. Yep. Mishalom nazik shalom, it pays full damages. Okay. Hahu chamer the achal nama upalsi l'sala. You had a donkey that ate a loaf of bread and it chewed up the basket that the bread was in. So Rabbi Yehudah says full damages on the bread and half damages on the baskets. So Gemara says 1 second. You figure, animals don't exactly know how to eat. They don't know the difference between the plate and the food, If you have a loaf of bread in a basket, it's not unusual for the animal to shred the basket as part of eating the foods. So you should be chayav on both of them. In other words, getting back to your question, Eric, the point here is that what's normal as part of the eating is going to be included in full damages, even if it's not foods. If in order to eat, it's going to shred the wrapper, which in this case happens to actually be something valuable. It's a basket. Chayav full damages in the basket.
Well, all right, but I would just say that I think it is possible for animals to know what is not food and to not consume it. For example, my saber-tooth killer attack pug, he knows that there are certain things instinctually, automatically, he just knows it's not something he can eat.
Yes,
he doesn't need any of the family medicine. If it gets spilled, he automatically passes it over.
So its unique intelligence is probably attributed to the saber-tooth, but
True, it is not fair to a superior being to lessers.
But no, I think it's also the case that the Torah considers the chamor to be among the stupider of the animals, right? You're the shor kanei of chamor avos v'olav.
Like turkeys.
Yeah,
they actually will drown. If you look up during a rainstorm, I had a friend who had a farm and he saw it, but okay. Right.
Anyway, it could. The other thing also could be that we're talking about a donkey. I presume usually doesn't eat breads, so it probably doesn't know the difference between the basket and the breads, as opposed to what goes into the trough, which it does eat from on a regular basis, and it does recognize its trough, as previously stated.
Depends how hungry the thing is.
That's also true.
Very aggressive.
Okay, so the Gemara says the ochel v'hodar polis. What happened was it ate the bread out of the basket, and then it chewed up the baskets. Upas orchiu. And so the Gemara says upas orchiu is normal for an animal to eat bread. For a minute, ochel pas balser v'tavshel shalom chatzinezik. If it eats bread, meat, or a dish, it has scrambled eggs or something, chatzinezik, half damages. My love, what's this referring to? Behema, a domesticated animal like a donkey, because it's unusual for donkey to eat bread, meat, and scrambled eggs. The Gemara says lo. We're talking about bakaya, an animal, a wild animal, probably a predatory animal. So the Gemara says chaya basar orchehu. It's perfectly normal for a predatory animal to eat meat. So the Gemara says the matfi, the meat is grilled. Evidently, a lion won't eat meat that's grilled. It's grilled. I don't know. You can investigate. Let's look at the National Geographic. See if someone's ever tried this. Okay, another possibility. Batavi, we're talking about a deer. A deer is a what they call it, a herbivore, right? It's not a carnivore. It's not carnivorous, and therefore it's unusual for a deer to eat meat. Another possibility is we're talking about an animal. We're talking about there's a difference whether the bread is on the table or the bread is sort of on the floor, next to the trough. Where it's on the floor, it thinks it's its food. When it's on the table, it does not. Hahu barcha, there was a goat. Somebody had a question about goats. It saw a type of onion on top of a barrel. So it jumped on top of the barrel to eat the turnip. Thank you. So what happened? The barrel clearly wasn't this. I wonder if it was a wood barrel, probably an amphora, a pottery barrel, and sure enough, it shattered the barrel. Rav says you have to pay full damages for both. My time, what's the reason? Because it's normal for it to eat turnips. It's also normal for it to jump to get the turnip, and that jumping is normal. Therefore, the breaking the barrel is part of the eating, and you're chayav on the eating as well. Does that answer your question, Eric? With regard to the donkey, there was the donkey jumps on top of the barrel to eat the turnip. It's chayav on the barrel nezik shalom, because if it's normal to eat, it's normal. It breaks the barrel. Yeah. So in other words, anything that's sort of normal,
Normal.
you're chayev. Not only is normal to eat, but normal is part of the process of eating. It would also be chayev. Okay. Amar Ilfa. Ilfa said, "Behema b'shus Rabim." Ilfa again was a good friend of Rabbi Yechanan. They were both scholars. Ilfa eventually went on to do business. Amar Ilfa. Behema b'shus Rabim poshet savarav ochla. There was an animal in a public domain who poshet savarav ochla me'agabe chaverta. It ate from on top of another animal. It was a pack animal that was carrying large amounts of hay, and it sort of ate from on top of the animal. Chayeves, you're chayev. My tamei gabe chaverta k'chatzon is a dummy. The top of the pack animal is considered a private domain. Gemara says, let's try to prove this. He was carrying a briefcase that was, let's say, filled with hay. And the animal went into his briefcase and started eating. Chayeves. He's chayev. So this would seem to indicate, 1 second. This would seem to indicate that it's like a private domain, and that's where you're chayev. So the Gemara says no. So Rava says no. We're not talking about Shane here. There's no evidence to say that Shane that you'd be chayev on Shane for eating from on top of another animal in a public domain. What actually went on here was bikafetzas. So you think you have a slow walking donkey pack animal, and a goat literally jumped up to eat some food, eat some hay off the pack animal. So that's abnormal, the jumping.
Okay.
And therefore, when we talk about chayev, we don't mean chayev of Shane, we mean chayev of Karen. And chayev actually doesn't mean full damages. Chayev means half damages, like every Karen. Because Karen is abnormal behavior. It literally means a horn.
Right.
Where do Rava give a statement? On this idea of Ravashia. You have an animal in the public domain. It was eating while it was walking. You're exempt from damages. But if it stops to eat, chayev. The Gemara says, the animal sometimes walks when it eats, sometimes it stands when it eats. It stops. Why is it that if it's walking, it's problematic, but if it stops, all of a sudden you're chayev? If you're walking, it's not problematic because it's Shane, and Shane of Shusarabim is potter. But if it stops, all of a sudden you are chayev. So Gemara says, Amarava, no. It doesn't mean that it actually stopped. What it means is that it jumped because fetzes. It jumped to eat. That's abnormal behavior, and therefore you're chayev Karen chatzin as like half damages because it's abnormal. Boy Reb Zera, Miskalgal Ma'u. 1 second. Okay. Let's say it rolls. Let's explain. Ma'u. What's the story? What exactly is the scenario? There was a what do they call it? A thing of hay. A bale of hay. Thank you. A bale of hay in the public domain. Okay, I'm sorry. The opposite. First scenario is, I'm sorry. The bale of hay was in the private domain. What it did was it pushed the bale into the public domain and ate it in the public domain. Toshma, let's examine this. The Tanya of Chia, you have a pack that's half inside a public domain and half outside. If it ate from the inside, it's chayav Shane. But if it ate what's in the public domain, it's exempt. My love, what does this mean? Miskalgal v'asi. Presumably, it means that the animal pushed it if it pushed it to the public domain, it's exempt. If it pushed it to the private domain, it's chayav. Samar says, no, not necessarily. It didn't actually push it. It actually ate so it was sort of on a ledge. If it ate from the inside or the part that was on the inside, chayav. If it ate the part that's on the outside, i.e. in the public domain, then you're exempt. Okay. Another possibility is Rav Chia was talking about the where did he translate aspasta? You translate it.
Rapid growth plant with
Yeah.
long stalks cut down at frequent intervals.
That much I could have told you.
Wow.
So aspasta is a aspasta grows very quickly, but it's used for fodder. That's the main thing. It's a fodder plant, and it's psila means a wick. And the point here is the leaves are very long. So psila aspasta means that it's very hard to know where the animal originated. Did it grow in the public or in the private domain? So we say what you eat in the public domain you're exempt from. What you eat in the private domain you're chayev. Ochloksus. It started eating clothing. So Gemara says, "Ahai." What are we referring to? Amarav akulu. All the scenarios. I'm sorry, 1 second. Okay. The Gemara says that in a private domain, if it eats normal foods, it eats grain or hay, then you're chayev, nezek shalom. Let's say it eats in a private domain, towel, chatzi nezek, it's karen. But if it eats in a public domain, it's exempt. What does that mean? If it eats in a public domain, it's exempt. Does that mean that? Does that mean that if it eats in a public domain, that if it eats in a public domain clothing, the animal's exempt as well? Or do we say no? That's Karen. Karen's chayav b'shusarab. If an animal eats clothing in a public domain, is it chayav or not? Chayav chatzi nezek because of Karen. Rav Akulu, my time. So Rav says it's going in everything. My time. Call Mashana Boach Bashina Boy Potter. What? So Rav says even if you put clothing in a public domain and the animal comes and eats it, you're exempt. Period. Even though it's Karen. Why? Because you shouldn't be putting down your clothing in a public domain. So if you did the wrong thing in a public domain and somebody else went ahead and damaged it, you're exempt. The damager is exempt. So he had no business hanging his clothes, across the public thoroughfare. And if an animal came and ate it, even though it's Karen is Chayav Sarabim, he's exempt. The concept is called Mashana Ubacha Bashina by Potter. Important to remember. We'll get back to it a couple times more in this Masechta. Call Mashana, anyone who made a change from the normal, Ubacha Bashina by, and somebody else went ahead and changed it, i.e. damaged it, Potter, you're exempt. Shmuel says no. Lo Shana Ela Paris V'Yarkos. So Spekelim Chayevas. If the animal eats in the public domain, you're exempt. But if it eats clothing, then you're chayev because it's Karen. Rish Lakish goes with Rav's statement that you'd be exempt from eating clothing in a public domain. Rish Lakish goes according to his own opinion. The Rish Lakish, Shtei Paras B'Shusarabim, Achas Revutza V'Achas Mahalachas. There were two oxen in a public domain. One was lying and one was walking. Ba'ata Mahalachas B'Revutza. The one that was walking kicked the one that was sitting. Petura, it's exempt. Why? Because an animal has no right to sit down in the middle of a major thoroughfare. You can't just sit down. If your animal's tired, bring him to the side. Don't sit him down in the middle. So if he's sitting down and another animal literally kicks him to get him up, he's exempt from damage. However, a vutz of malachas chayev. If the animal that was sitting down kicks an animal that was walking, the animal sitting down had no right to kick. It has no right to sit either. And therefore, the animal sitting down is chayev. Okay, that's the opinion of Rish Lakish. For Rabbi Yochanan says, Lo shano paris v'yorokas. So spekelim chayevas. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, you're chayev on garments in a public domain. Lame Rabbi Yochanan less than Rish Lakish. It seems that Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with the Rish Lakish. 1 second. For a second. Okay. Let's say that Rabbi Yochanan disagrees on Rish Lakish also with regard to the two types of animals. One was lying, one was standing, and if the lying one that kicks is chayev, the standing one that kicks the one that's lying is exempt because he has no business to lie in a public domain. So the Gemara says, "Lo, not necessarily. Lo is like sus abi inish demanchi glimi umiftechi al behem alav orcha." it is normal for a person to, let's say, rest in a public domain and take off his coat, and therefore it's not unusual that there is permission granted for a person to leave his coat in a public domain. And because permission is granted, therefore because he has a right to keep his coat there, an animal that eats it would be chayev chatzin ezek because of kara. But it could be he'd agree that an animal has no right to lie in the middle of a public thoroughfare. It's like parking in the middle of the street. Okay. And then it's mishalamas mashanedes. And if it does damage, you pay the value of the damage. Okay. I'm sorry. If you're exempt from payment in a public domain, you pay the value of the benefits, not the value of the damage. What is that? The Kamma Rabba Omar Dmei Omar. Rabba says the value of the cheapest food. In other words, so basically the guy, let's say the animal eats hay, and presume that hay is the highest in the hierarchy of food, and the cheapest food is soy. So you could tell him, look, I would not have fed my animal hay. Yeah. I would have fed him soy. So therefore, I don't have to pay you hay. I can pay you the equivalent value of soy. In other words, let's say my animal is completely full. Let's say it eats $5 worth of hay, but only $1 worth of soy in a feeding. I owe you $1. Make sense? Yeah. Okay. Rava says the Mesa Urim Bizol. So Rava says no. 1 second. If your animal eats grain instead of soy, it's a higher quality animal, right? It's grain finished or hay finished, whatever. I don't know the differences here. An animal that eats soy, that eats grain, is a better animal. So you don't pay soy, because you pay what you would have paid had you found grain at a discount price. So soy is $1, but you would have fed your animal grain had you been able to get it for $2. So you actually owe me $2. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Tiny Kava said the Rabba, the Bryce supports Rabba. Tiny Kava said the Rava, the Bryce supports Rava. Tiny Kava said the Rabba, the Bryce supports Rabba. Shimon Yechai Omer, Aim Shalman El Dmei Omer Bavad. Shimon Yechai says you pay the value of the cheapest type of food. Tiny Kava said the Rava, the Bryce supports Rava. Imnen it's Mishalamas Mashanedes. If the owner derives benefit, you pay the value of the benefit. Kate said, how does that work? Achla Kav Oy Kabayim. It eats 1 or 2 kabim. Ein Omer T'Shalom D'Meim. You don't say pay the value of what it was worth. How much would a person give his animal premium food, even though he usually doesn't feed his animal premium food? Right? So in other words, if you feed your animal the cheapest food, you pay $1 per feeding. But let's say you got the better food on sale. How much did you pay for it? And therefore, if it eats something that's bad for it, something that causes the animal to be I guess less vibrant, Tura, then you're exempt, because you would not have fed your animal this type of food. Right? If you had in other words, you'd rather your animal eat soy than eat something that's bad for it. Okay. We'll stop here. I also fell asleep while preparing this.